Welcome to our deep exploration of one of the Bible's most enigmatic figures, Melchizedek, the mysterious priest-king whose brief appearance in Genesis has captivated theologians and scholars for millennia. In this comprehensive study, we'll uncover the layers of mystery surrounding this ancient figure who appears without genealogy, blesses Abraham, and vanishes into history, leaving behind profound questions about priesthood, divine authority, and eternal significance. If you're fascinated by biblical mysteries and want to dive deeper into the hidden truths of Scripture, make sure to like this video and subscribe to our channel for more thought-provoking content. Let's begin this journey into one of the most intriguing theological puzzles in all of biblical literature. Throughout the annals of biblical history, few figures have captured the imagination and sparked as much theological debate as Melchizedek, the mysterious priest-king who appears briefly in the book of Genesis and then vanishes into the shadows of antiquity. His story, though consisting of merely 3 verses in the Hebrew Bible, has generated centuries of speculation, interpretation, and wonder among scholars, theologians, and believers alike. The enigmatic nature of this ancient figure has led to questions that continue to resonate through the corridors of religious thought, challenging our understanding of priesthood, kingship, and the divine order itself. The first encounter with Melchizedek occurs in Genesis chapter 14, where we find Abraham returning from a successful military campaign to rescue his nephew Lot. As Abraham makes his way back from defeating the coalition of kings led by Kedorlaomer, he encounters this mysterious figure who is described as both king of Salem and priest of God Most High. The brevity of this encounter is striking, yet its implications are profound. Melchizedek brings forth bread and wine, blesses Abraham, and receives from him a tithe of all the spoils of war. This simple exchange would echo through millennia, becoming the foundation for one of the most intriguing theological mysteries in all of Scripture. What makes Melchizedek so fascinating is not merely what is said about him, but what is conspicuously absent from the biblical record. Unlike other significant biblical figures, there is no genealogy provided for Melchizedek. We are not told who his father was, who his mother was, or from what lineage he descended. This absence of genealogical information is particularly striking in a culture that placed enormous emphasis on ancestry and tribal identity. The Hebrew Bible is replete with detailed genealogies, tracing the lineage of important figures back through generations. Yet Melchizedek appears without introduction, without context, and without explanation, as if he materialized from the very fabric of eternity itself. The writer of the book of Hebrews would later seize upon this absence of genealogical information to make a profound theological point. In Hebrews chapter 7, we read that Melchizedek was without father, without mother, without genealogy, having neither beginning of days nor end of life. This description has led to centuries of speculation about the true nature of Melchizedek. Some have argued that this language is merely a literary device, emphasizing that the biblical record simply does not provide genealogical information about this figure. Others have suggested that these words point to something far more profound, hinting at a divine or semi-divine nature that transcends ordinary human existence. The title given to Melchizedek in Genesis is equally intriguing. He is called Priest of God Most High, using the Hebrew term El Elyon. This designation is significant because it suggests that Melchizedek was not merely a priest of some local deity or tribal god, but rather a priest of the supreme God, the creator of heaven and earth. This is remarkable when we consider that this encounter takes place long before the establishment of the Levitical priesthood, before the giving of the law at Mount Sinai, and before the formal establishment of the covenant relationship between God and the people of Israel. Here we have a figure who apparently held a legitimate priestly office in service to the one true God, existing outside the bounds of the later covenant arrangements that would define Hebrew religious life. The geographical setting of this encounter also adds to the mystery. Melchizedek is identified as the king of Salem, which most scholars believe refers to the city that would later become Jerusalem. This connection to Jerusalem is significant for several reasons. First, it establishes a link between Melchizedek and the city that would become the center of Hebrew worship, the location of the temple, and the seat of the Davidic dynasty. Second, it suggests that even before Abraham's descendants took possession of the Promised Land, there was already a legitimate priest-king ruling in what would become the Holy City. This raises fascinating questions about the continuity of divine worship and the existence of righteous leadership outside the bounds of the covenant community. The bread and wine that Melchizedek brings forth to Abraham have captured the attention of theologians for centuries. Some have seen in this simple meal a prefiguration of the Christian Eucharist, with bread and wine serving as symbols of spiritual nourishment and covenant relationship. Others have interpreted this as a customary act of hospitality, a way of honoring a victorious warrior returning from battle. Still others have suggested that the bread and wine represent the abundance of the land, a tangible sign of God's blessing upon Salem and its king. Whatever the precise meaning, the imagery is rich with symbolic potential and has contributed to the enduring fascination with this mysterious figure. The blessing that Melchizedek pronounces over Abraham is equally significant. He blesses Abraham in the name of God Most High, the maker of heaven and earth, and then offers praise to God for delivering Abraham's enemies into his hand. This blessing establishes a relationship between Melchizedek and Abraham that is both surprising and theologically significant. Here we have a figure who appears to have spiritual authority that even Abraham, the father of the faithful, recognizes and respects. The fact that Abraham receives this blessing without question or hesitation suggests that he recognized in Melchizedek a legitimate representative of divine authority. Perhaps even more striking is Abraham's response to Melchizedek's blessing. The patriarch gives him a tithe of all the spoils of war, a tenth of everything he had recovered in his military campaign. This act of tithing is remarkable for several reasons. First, it demonstrates Abraham's recognition of Melchizedek's spiritual authority and his willingness to honor that authority through material giving. Second, it establishes a principle of tithing that would later become codified in Hebrew law, suggesting that this practice had its roots in divine revelation rather than human tradition. Third, it shows that Abraham, despite his own covenant relationship with God, acknowledged the legitimacy of Melchizedek's priesthood and was willing to submit to his spiritual authority. The theological implications of this encounter have been debated for centuries. Some early Christian theologians saw in Melchizedek a prefiguration of Jesus Christ, pointing to his role as both priest and king, his association with bread and wine, and his apparent eternal nature. This interpretation found its fullest expression in the book of Hebrews, where the author argues that Jesus is a priest forever after the order of Melchizedek, not after the order of Aaron. This comparison elevates the priesthood of Jesus above that of the Levitical system, suggesting that Jesus' priesthood is based on a more ancient and more fundamental principle than the law of Moses. The order of Melchizedek, as described in the book of Hebrews, represents a priesthood that is not based on genealogical descent but on divine appointment. Unlike the Levitical priesthood, which was passed down from father to son within the tribe of Levi, the priesthood of Melchizedek appears to be based on divine calling and eternal appointment. This distinction is crucial for understanding the Christian claim that Jesus, who was not from the tribe of Levi, could nevertheless serve as humanity's great high priest. By appealing to the order of Melchizedek, the author of Hebrews argues that Jesus' priesthood is both legitimate and superior to the Levitical system. The mysterious nature of Melchizedek has also led to extensive speculation about his identity. Some Jewish traditions have identified him with Shem, the son of Noah, suggesting that he was a survivor of the flood who carried forward the true worship of God into the post-flood world. This identification would make Melchizedek a contemporary of Abraham and would explain his knowledge of the true God without compromising the uniqueness of Abraham's calling. Other traditions have suggested that Melchizedek was a supernatural being, perhaps an angel or a theophany, a pre-incarnate appearance of the divine. Still others have proposed that he was simply a righteous Gentile king who had come to know the true God through natural revelation or divine encounter. The absence of any mention of Melchizedek's death in the biblical record has also contributed to the mystery surrounding his identity. While the text of Hebrews speaks of him as being without end of life, this could be understood either literally or figuratively. If understood literally, it might suggest that Melchizedek was translated to heaven like Enoch or Elijah, or that he was a supernatural being who did not experience death. If understood figuratively, it might simply mean that the biblical record does not mention his death, just as it does not mention his birth or genealogy. The relationship between Melchizedek and the later Davidic dynasty has also been a subject of considerable interest. Psalm 110, which is attributed to David, contains the famous verse, "The Lord has sworn and will not change his mind, you are a priest forever after the order of Melchizedek." This psalm is understood by many scholars to be a royal psalm, celebrating the coronation or victory of a Davidic king. The reference to the order of Melchizedek in this context suggests that the Davidic kings saw themselves as inheriting not only the political authority of Melchizedek as king of Salem but also his priestly role as a mediator between God and the people. This dual role of priest and king in the person of Melchizedek represents a unique form of leadership that was rare in the ancient world. Most ancient societies maintained a clear distinction between political and religious authority, with kings handling temporal affairs and priests managing spiritual matters. The combination of these roles in a single individual suggests either extraordinary divine appointment or a form of government that predated the later separation of these functions. This fusion of priestly and kingly authority would later become a crucial element in Christian understanding of the nature of Christ's ministry and reign. The historical context of Melchizedek's appearance also raises important questions about the religious landscape of the ancient Near East. The fact that a legitimate priest of God Most High was ruling in Salem during Abraham's time suggests that the knowledge and worship of the true God was not limited to Abraham and his immediate family. This challenges any notion that monotheism was a late development in Hebrew religion or that the knowledge of God was confined to the covenant community. Instead, it suggests that there may have been a broader tradition of true worship that existed alongside the polytheistic religions that dominated the ancient world. The archaeological evidence for the existence of Salem as a significant city during the time of Abraham is limited but suggestive. While we cannot definitively prove the historical existence of Melchizedek, the archaeological record does indicate that Jerusalem was inhabited during the Middle Bronze Age, the period when Abraham would have lived. The city appears to have been a significant urban center with strong fortifications and evidence of sophisticated religious practices. This archaeological context makes the biblical account of a priest-king ruling in Salem during Abraham's time historically plausible, even if we cannot verify the specific details of the encounter. The influence of Melchizedek on later Jewish thought extends far beyond the biblical record. In the Dead Sea Scrolls, discovered at Qumran, we find extensive speculation about Melchizedek's identity and role. Some of these texts present him as a heavenly figure who will play a crucial role in the final judgment and the establishment of God's kingdom. These writings suggest that during the Second Temple period, Melchizedek had become a figure of considerable importance in Jewish eschatological thinking, representing the hope for a future priest-king who would restore righteousness to the world. The early Christian Church seized upon the figure of Melchizedek as a powerful type or prefiguration of Jesus Christ. The parallels between Melchizedek and Jesus are striking and numerous. Both are described as priests of God, both are associated with bread and wine, both are said to be kings, and both are described as having eternal priesthood. The author of Hebrews develops these parallels extensively, arguing that Jesus is the fulfillment of what Melchizedek only foreshadowed. This typological interpretation became a cornerstone of Christian theology, providing a way to understand Jesus' priesthood that transcended the limitations of the Levitical system. The mystery of Melchizedek also extends to questions about the nature of divine revelation and the extent of God's self-disclosure to humanity. The existence of a legitimate priest of God Most High outside the covenant community suggests that God's revelation was not limited to Abraham and his descendants. This raises important questions about natural revelation, the possibility of salvation outside the covenant, and the universality of divine truth. These questions have important implications for understanding the relationship between Christianity and other religious traditions, and they continue to be debated by theologians and scholars today. The symbolism associated with Melchizedek has also had a profound impact on Christian liturgy and worship. The bread and wine that he brought to Abraham have been seen as prefiguring the Eucharist, and many liturgical traditions include references to Melchizedek in their celebration of Holy Communion. The Roman Catholic canon of the Mass, for example, includes a prayer that asks God to accept the offering as he accepted the gifts of Abel, Abraham, and Melchizedek. This liturgical connection helps to maintain the link between the ancient priesthood of Melchizedek and the ongoing sacramental life of the Christian Church. The interpretive challenges posed by the figure of Melchizedek have also contributed to the development of biblical hermeneutics. The sparse biblical record concerning Melchizedek has forced interpreters to grapple with questions about how to understand texts that seem to point beyond themselves to greater mysteries. The tension between what is explicitly stated in the text and what is implied or suggested has led to sophisticated discussions about the nature of biblical interpretation and the relationship between the literal and the spiritual senses of Scripture. Modern scholarship has approached the mystery of Melchizedek from various angles, employing tools from archaeology, comparative religion, and historical critical analysis. Some scholars have attempted to place Melchizedek within the broader context of ancient Near Eastern religion, comparing him to other priest-king figures from Mesopotamian and Egyptian sources. Others have focused on the literary and theological function of the Melchizedek narrative within the larger biblical story, asking how this brief encounter contributes to the overall themes of Genesis and the Hebrew Bible. The enduring fascination with Melchizedek also reflects deeper human longings for understanding the relationship between the temporal and the eternal, the political and the spiritual, the human and the divine. In a world where these spheres are often seen as separate or even opposed, Melchizedek represents a vision of integrated authority and unified purpose. He embodies the possibility of leadership that is both effective in the world and faithful to divine principles, both practical and spiritual, both temporal and eternal. The mystery of Melchizedek ultimately points to the limitations of human understanding and the inexhaustible depths of divine mystery. Despite centuries of study and speculation, this enigmatic figure continues to elude our complete comprehension. He appears in the biblical narrative like a meteor streaking across the night sky, brilliant and brief, leaving behind only questions and wonder. Perhaps this is precisely the point. Perhaps Melchizedek is meant to remain mysterious, serving as a reminder that there are aspects of God's work in the world that transcend our ability to fully understand or explain. In our contemporary world, the figure of Melchizedek continues to speak to fundamental questions about authority, legitimacy, and the nature of spiritual leadership. In an age of increasing secularization and the separation of religious and political authority, Melchizedek represents a vision of integrated leadership that many find compelling. He suggests the possibility of authority that is both effective and righteous, both powerful and humble, both human and divine. The true mystery of Melchizedek may ultimately be not who he was, but what he represents. He stands as a testament to the reality of divine presence in human history, the possibility of righteousness outside conventional religious boundaries, and the eternal nature of God's purposes in the world. Whether understood as a historical figure, a literary symbol, or a theological type, Melchizedek continues to challenge our assumptions about the nature of divine revelation and the scope of God's work in the world. The theological implications of Melchizedek's eternal priesthood extend far beyond historical curiosity into the realm of eschatological hope. The concept of a priest who serves forever, who needs no successor, and whose authority transcends the limitations of mortal existence, speaks to humanity's deepest longings for permanence in an impermanent world. This priesthood represents not merely a religious office but a cosmic principle of mediation between the divine and human realms. In a universe marked by decay and death, the eternal priesthood of Melchizedek offers a vision of spiritual authority that endures beyond the ravages of time. The philosophical questions raised by Melchizedek's mysterious nature have influenced centuries of theological reflection on the nature of existence itself. If Melchizedek is truly without beginning or end, what does this tell us about the nature of time and eternity? Does his existence suggest that there are beings who exist outside the normal flow of temporal existence, participating in eternity while simultaneously engaging with history? These questions touch on fundamental issues of metaphysics and the relationship between the temporal and eternal realms. The literary artistry of the Melchizedek narrative also deserves careful consideration. The author of Genesis presents this encounter with remarkable economy, yet every detail seems laden with significance. The brevity of the account forces readers to grapple with ambiguity and mystery, creating space for interpretation and reflection. This literary technique mirrors the nature of divine revelation itself, which often comes not through exhaustive explanation but through pregnant silences and meaningful gaps that invite contemplation. The cross-cultural parallels to Melchizedek found in ancient Near Eastern literature have provided scholars with valuable insights into the historical and religious context of his appearance. Similar priest-king figures appear in Mesopotamian and Egyptian texts, suggesting that the combination of religious and political authority was a recognized form of leadership in the ancient world. However, these parallels also highlight what is unique about Melchizedek, his association with the God Most High, his encounter with Abraham, and his mysterious nature set him apart from other ancient priest-kings. The impact of Melchizedek on the development of Christian Christology cannot be overstated. The author of Hebrews uses the figure of Melchizedek to argue for the superiority of Christ's priesthood over the Levitical system, but this argument depends on understanding Melchizedek as more than merely a historical figure. He becomes a type or pattern that reveals eternal truths about the nature of divine mediation. This typological interpretation has shaped Christian understanding of Jesus as the eternal high priest who intercedes for humanity before the throne of God. The mystical traditions within both Judaism and Christianity have found in Melchizedek a figure of particular fascination. Some mystical writers have identified him with the archangel Michael, seeing in him a heavenly being who descends to earth to interact with humanity. Others have understood him as a perfected human being who has transcended the normal limitations of mortal existence. These mystical interpretations reflect a desire to understand Melchizedek as a bridge between the human and divine realms, a figure who embodies the possibility of spiritual transformation and elevation. The sociological implications of Melchizedek's dual role as priest and king have also attracted scholarly attention. In most ancient societies, the concentration of both religious and political power in a single individual was viewed with suspicion or seen as a source of potential tyranny. Yet Melchizedek appears to exercise both forms of authority in a way that commands respect and recognition from Abraham. This suggests either extraordinary personal righteousness or a form of divine appointment that transcends normal human political arrangements. The theological concept of the order of Melchizedek has had profound implications for understanding the nature of spiritual authority and succession. Unlike hereditary priesthood, which depends on biological descent, the order of Melchizedek appears to be based on divine calling and eternal appointment. This principle has influenced Christian understanding of ordination and spiritual authority, suggesting that true spiritual leadership comes not from human tradition but from divine commission. The eschatological dimensions of Melchizedek's significance have been particularly prominent in Jewish apocalyptic literature. The Dead Sea Scrolls contain texts that present Melchizedek as an eschatological figure who will play a crucial role in the final judgment and the establishment of God's kingdom. These writings suggest that during the Second Temple period, Melchizedek had become a symbol of hope for divine intervention and the restoration of righteousness. This eschatological interpretation has continued to influence both Jewish and Christian thought about the end times. The relationship between Melchizedek and the concept of natural revelation has important implications for understanding the universality of divine truth. The fact that Melchizedek appears to have knowledge of the true God without being part of the covenant community suggests that God's revelation extends beyond particular religious traditions. This raises important questions about the relationship between special revelation and general revelation, and the possibility of authentic spiritual knowledge outside established religious boundaries. The archaeological quest for evidence of Melchizedek's historical existence has yielded intriguing but inconclusive results. While we cannot definitively prove the historical existence of this mysterious figure, the archaeological record does support the plausibility of the biblical account. Evidence of sophisticated urban centers in the region during the Middle Bronze Age, along with indications of complex religious practices, provides a historical context in which a figure like Melchizedek could have existed. The influence of Melchizedek on the development of medieval theology was particularly significant. Medieval theologians saw in him a prefiguration of Christ's eternal priesthood and used his example to argue for the superiority of spiritual authority over temporal power. This interpretation had important implications for the relationship between church and state, with some arguing that spiritual authority, represented by Melchizedek's priesthood, should take precedence over political authority. The Renaissance and Reformation periods brought new approaches to understanding Melchizedek, with reformers like John Calvin and Martin Luther offering different interpretations of his significance. Calvin emphasized Melchizedek's role as a type of Christ, while Luther focused on the implications of his eternal priesthood for understanding the nature of salvation. These different emphases reflect broader theological disagreements about the nature of grace, faith, and the relationship between the Old and New Testaments. Modern psychological approaches to understanding Melchizedek have focused on his function as an archetypal figure representing the integration of spiritual and temporal authority. Carl Jung and his followers have seen in Melchizedek a symbol of the wholeness and integration that represents psychological and spiritual maturity. This psychological interpretation suggests that Melchizedek represents not just a historical figure but a pattern of human development and spiritual growth. The feminist theological critique of Melchizedek has raised important questions about the exclusively male imagery associated with this figure and its implications for understanding spiritual authority. Some feminist theologians have argued that the emphasis on Melchizedek's priesthood has contributed to the exclusion of women from positions of spiritual leadership. Others have suggested that the mysterious nature of Melchizedek's identity opens up possibilities for more inclusive understandings of spiritual authority. The postmodern approach to Melchizedek has emphasized the constructed nature of religious meaning and the role of interpretation in creating significance. Postmodern theologians have argued that Melchizedek's meaning cannot be fixed or determined definitively, but must be understood as an ongoing process of interpretation and reinterpretation. This approach highlights the creative role of religious communities in constructing meaning and significance. The interfaith dialogue surrounding Melchizedek has revealed both commonalities and differences in how different religious traditions understand this figure. While Christians have generally seen him as a type of Christ, Jewish interpreters have maintained focus on his role within the Hebrew Bible itself. Islamic tradition has also shown interest in Melchizedek, with some Muslim scholars identifying him with various figures from Islamic history and tradition. The contemporary relevance of Melchizedek extends beyond academic theology into practical questions of leadership and authority in modern society. In an age of increasing specialization and the separation of different spheres of authority, Melchizedek represents a vision of integrated leadership that many find compelling. He suggests the possibility of authority that is both effective and righteous, both practical and spiritual. The environmental implications of Melchizedek's blessing have also attracted attention from contemporary theologians concerned with ecological issues. His blessing of Abraham includes reference to God as maker of heaven and earth, suggesting a cosmic perspective that encompasses the entire created order. This ecological dimension of Melchizedek's blessing has been used to argue for a more holistic understanding of divine authority that includes responsibility for the natural world. The technological age has brought new questions about the nature of permanence and transcendence that relate to Melchizedek's mysterious nature. In a world of rapid change and technological disruption, the concept of eternal priesthood offers a vision of stability and continuity that transcends the limitations of technological progress. This has led some contemporary theologians to see in Melchizedek a resource for addressing the spiritual challenges of the digital age. As we conclude our exploration of this mysterious figure, we are left not with answers but with deeper questions, not with certainty but with wonder. The mystery of Melchizedek remains intact, as it should. Some mysteries are meant to be contemplated rather than solved, experienced rather than explained. In the end, perhaps the greatest truth about Melchizedek is that he points beyond himself to an even greater mystery, the mystery of God's eternal purposes and the hope of a kingdom where righteousness and peace will reign forever.